G'day Reefers, I'm Ania and welcome to Gallery Aquatica TV. That's right, we're in the prop room. That means we've got another episode of the Frag Files, and today we'll be featuring Seriatopora. So before we get fragging, I thought this would be the perfect opportunity to check up on our Chalice frags, which you may remember we covered in a previous episode of the Frag Files. So the two treatments that we were comparing was the success rate of Chalice frags taken with an obvious mouth and Chalice frags that were taken up of the surrounding tissue, the base tissue, and we put them on round frag plugs and square frag plugs. So the results are really clear cut, and I have to admit I'm very surprised by this. All of the frags which have been taken with a mouth have grown, encrusted the frag plug, and 100% of them have survived. I have to admit I've sold a couple of these over the past few months because of the demand on this rainbow. It is just stunning. But let's take a look now at what happened to the ones without a mouth. And you know, they haven't really done very well. I can only see really 2, maybe 3 healthy frags out of at least 16 or 20 frags here that have made it. And I have to admit, I'm really surprised by this. You know, I don't often do any kind of fragging that doesn't end in a 100% success rate. So I'm really glad we checked this, we had to experiment this way, because I'd say we've learnt a lesson. So, case closed on the Chalice Frag Files. Let's check out the bird's nest that we're going to be fragging today. Okay, so we've got quite a number of large Seriatopora colonies here, and it's definitely time to give them a bit of a trim. So, one of the reasons that frags of bird's nest corals are so wonderful is that you get to grow it out in your specific growing conditions. Now, the shape of the bird's nest not only is determined by the species of Seriatopora, but also the flow available to the coral at the time of its development. And so what you can see, if you're trying to relocate or reposition a larger grown colony or a wild colony, you actually get this effect here, where you get a bit of dieback and coral bleaching on the center of the colony, which is no longer receiving enough flow. And this beautiful new growth has all grown towards the light in a particular direction, making it look a little off balance. So this colony is certainly a great candidate for us to frag today. The other coral I'd really like to talk about is this rare Seriatopora Dendritica. And it is not just rare here in Australia, but on the worldwide reefing scene. It has incredibly sharp growth tips, and I'll tell you a story about how we got that piece and how we ID'd it a little later as well. The third kind of bird's nest that I'm really interested in talking about today are the bird of paradise. Now, it has just come to our attention, we actually have 2 types that we've been calling bird of paradise. We've got this beautiful one here, and so the color variant is like a yellowy lime green base with a bluey violet polyp. And then there's this one here, which seems to have more of a concentration of the violet on the tips. And what I believe this could be is a difference between Seriatopora stellata and Seriatopora guttatatus. But either way, they're both stunning and they're both up for a cut. So here's everything we're going to need today to frag the Seriatopora. We've got some nice new stainless steel coral snips, and this pack is from Addicted to Fish, so I'm really excited about giving this a go. We've got some porcelain frag plugs which have been soaking in order to get all the air bubbles out. We've got some Ecotech frag glue. I love this glue because it is a gel consistency. Coral RX to dip the frags once they need to be healed from being cut. Some foam blocks to prop up the frags, and 2 buckets, one for the dip, one for the bath, and of course a towel. So let's get fragging. Right, so we've got everything set up, and I thought because it is so easy to frag Seriatopora that we will do a bit of a comparison frag. So we're going to set down the growth tips of the bird's nest and compare that to cuts of just the stem, and after a couple of weeks we'll be able to find out and see if maybe we get more branching from the stem, or maybe we get more encrusting from the ones with the tips. I don't know. But let's start off with this giant piece here with the patch in the center. And so bird's nest is relatively brittle, these species of bird's nest. Not every single species is easy to frag even with your finger, but this one is. And so it's also beneficial to trade frags because it's so much easier to transport them. You really gonna struggle to get a fish bag that doesn't pop with a piece like this, and even when you transport it in something like a bucket or a container, you're then going to be actually faced with potentially breaking it in transit. I mean, it is so rare for us to receive a wild bird's nest anyway, but when we do, it pretty much will always have a couple of pieces fallen off in the bag. So I think that's enough for that one. This one was a lovely, like a pale green with a bit of a pinky tip. And so we've got those. And I think you really want to make the frags attractive as well. So you can put multiple stems on each. I've soaked these, just going to put some glue down. So I've sorted these into tips and stems, and now it's really just a matter of positioning them. And this can be a little bit tedious because you don't really have much for the base to kind of hold on to. So you really got to rely on very good glue, a bit of water, and a very good prop. There are some really amazing frag plugs out there in the market which have a little divot on the center. I wish I had some of those here today. They would really be helpful for bird's nest, but alas, I could only find 2 or 3, so weren't able to use them today. But you can always do the top down water dripping trick if you want to set the glue a little bit faster. Also, surely it's a bit beneficial for the coral to stay wet. And on these kinds of frag plugs where we have a lot of space, I see no problem with adding multiple pieces to one frag. It'll just make it so much more attractive. My good friend Shane likes to bonsai these little seri tips as they grow to make them even more attractive and saleable at their coral farm. So I think that's really sweet. If they do fall over, I don't really get too distressed about it. Obviously you don't want glue to encase the polyps because it'll smother them, but I've seen a lot of people actually position the bird's nest frags initially sideways because it allows for more contact point between the tip and the glue. So we've mounted the tips and the stems of the disfigured Seriatopora colony. Now, I'd really like to frag the two bird of paradise. So I'm going to do exactly the same thing again. Just being very mindful about where I take the cuts because of our interesting experiment. We've cut them up into little pieces, and now it's just a matter of gluing them down again. So all that we have left now is the Seriatopora Dendritica, and this is a very unique piece of bird's nest. It is definitely got a different kind of skeleton. It's incredibly dense, very difficult to cut, very difficult to frag, incredibly slow growing, and unlike most of the other species of bird's nest, it really appreciates very low lighting. So I have made frags of this a few times before, unsuccessfully, so I feel like it's incredibly sensitive to change. And because it is such a slow growing piece, I also am a little apprehensive to keep fragging it. But we've got such a long wish list of this beautiful coral. Oh, it's even got a little bird's nest crab inside. Oh, hello. Oh, I've got to keep you wet. Oh. So these commensal crabs are incredibly sweet, and they often are deemed to assist with the health of the colony by freeing it up. Oh my gosh. By freeing it up. So it's not that I'm a klutz. This is exactly what happens with this colony. You go to frag a particular place, you've got a target in mind, and whack, the whole stem just comes apart. And so I've really got no choice but to use the pieces that have fallen down here. I'm just going to pop little guy back, like safely in the water, while I talk about this coral. So we've covered the density of the skeleton and the fact that it really hates strong lighting. I'd love to tell a story about how we got this piece. So a few years ago, we were unpacking an Aquatica order from Cairns Marine, and out comes this pale, tiny little dense, very sharp axial piece of acro, and it's sort of hinting at green but also incredibly bleached, and I was really surprised to see that. So we take photos because we often like to track the progress of wild pieces of coral as they come in. So we put the Seriatopora Dendritica in Cam's display, thinking it was Aquatica, thinking that it was going to really enjoy the strong flow and the strong light, and you know, it didn't take long before we realized that the tips were not just damaged in transit axial corallites, they had no axial corallites. And that's when I realized, upon taking some macro shots with my underwater camera, that we weren't dealing with a rare species of Aquatica that I'd never seen before. Without axial corallites, we had to be dealing with non-Aquatica. So I took a bunch of these photos and sent them to Jake Adams, our friend from Reef Builders. And I had said to him, Jake, what is this? It looks a little bit like a Seriatopora, but I'd never seen this before. And of course, we've got the Veron books, right? But I disregard corals which are not zoned in the Australian reefs where these pieces are actually collected for us. So Dendritica is not actually classified as being a coral that's found on the Great Barrier Reef. So I disregarded it, and though I had my hunch, and so we then find out from Jake the next morning, who had published an article by the time we woke up, that it was actually, in fact, I can't cut that, Seriatopora Dendritica. And after which we moved it down much lower in the light because the axial corallites were non-existent. The radial corallites were actually growing down in my photography that I'd sent to Jake, and that was the most curious part, that those polyps were facing upside down to the lighting. So we moved it to about 150 par, and after Jake's article, you know, it's almost like the piece went viral and we had 100 people requesting a frag. So here I go, of course, Birdsnest, so easy to frag. So I jump in there, go to frag, and the whole piece falls apart, just like that, just like what happened before. Also, I nearly broke my wrist. So that then allowed us to put multiple pieces in multiple pars. There was 50 par, 80 par, 100 par, 150 par, and we were able to track the progress of these pieces over time. So what we determined in our care, the Seriatopora Dendritica really does prefer to be in much, much lower light, but really does appreciate a nice strong flow. So I'm going to leave this piece large like this. I have, as I've mentioned, tried to frag this a number of times before, but the frags tend not to really make it. Wondering if that's because I was doing them too small, or because they hate being out of water, or because they hate any movement or disturbance. So I'm going to make sure that I put these frags back exactly where this adult wild colony was. So fast forward, it's a beautiful piece of coral. Be sure to read Jake Adams' article about it with my photography showing what I'm talking about with the upside down corallite, and hopefully after today's session we're able to share it with maybe 7 more lucky reefers. So just before I go, I thought I'd show you a Birdsnest frag that we prepared earlier. This frag is on a frag because it needed more space. This is a beautiful pink Seriatopora hystrix, and you can see how even that growth is. It's very compact, it's neat, there's no bleaching on the inside, and so this is what we're really hoping to achieve with our fragging efforts today. All that's left for me to do is put these through the dip, a bath, to rinse the dip off and place them back into our system so we can check them out on a future episode of the Frag Files. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm Ania, and happy reefing.
That's our video for today. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit the like button and make sure you've subscribed to our channel so you don't miss an episode of Gallery Aquatica TV. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Cam the Fish Guy. Happy reefing!